Hello Idle Hero fans, thank you for tuning in today for part 3 of my tier list series that I'm doing for each faction. And today we're going to be looking at the Shadow faction, which is probably one of the least surprising, I guess, in terms of the way things end up dicing out, because Shadow has been pretty strong for a while, so there's been a lot of insight already put forward about this faction. But I guess the first one that's a bit of a toss-up is going to be 5th place, and that will be Field. Now, I've been pretty outspoken about not liking Field in general. The main reason being that he's too slow. If you look at the main reason people say that he is a good hero, or that he could have potential as a good hero, is that he can stun assassins 80% of the time. His damage is pretty low, but having an 80% stun is very valuable, I'll grant you that. The problem with all this is that he has 788 movement speed or attack speed, and that's very bad. That means that he will never get to go before any assassin, essentially, which means that his stun will only ever be for 1 turn, and that is very low impact for a hero that doesn't have much damage. His second ability has a 50% chance to stun a target, so that's okay, but 50% is far too low. Deals an extra 75% on stun foes, which again is relying on his his second passive, which is a low percent chance. And his third ability is increases his armor break and his attack. And these are already factored in, so if you look at, he has 32 armor break by passive, and the 8400 attack includes that bonus. So there's just not really a lot going on here. The only reason I did put him over the other hero that I was looking at, which was Karma, is because her speed is even worse. Somehow she has 756 speed. She does have a lot more attack, but a lot less HP. So she's really slow, and she's probably not going to make it too far into an actual fight because she's low HP and she's really slow. Her stun is actually pretty fair. 136% attack with 10,000 base attack is pretty nice. 30% chance to petrify for 2 rounds is beautiful. If she was faster, she'd be insanely strong, but she also has this problem where like all of her abilities are focused around hit, reduces dodge, increases hit. And this one here is okay. When she's below 50% health, her attack gets increased by 80%. Which is really strong, and 50% health is normally not too bad because half health is like the higher metric for these. Usually these abilities that are activated when the hero hits a certain HP is when they're below 30%, so 50% is much more acceptable, except for the fact that her HP is so low in general. So I had to put Field above her, but I don't think either of them are actually good heroes. They both need more speed in order to do what they want. And if they got that, then perhaps they'd be worth considering, but until then, it's just not the case. And number 4, we're going to be looking at Lutz. And Lutz has kind of been, he's one of my favorite underrated heroes, because he, on the other hand, he has 814 speed, whereas Field only has 788. He can stun much more actively than Field will. He also does a lot more damage. With about the same attack, but he does 125% of his attack, so his attack is much more powerful. His ability can't be dodged, so he's, again, accounted for Mickey, because everyone's accounted for Mickey. He has the basic armor break, similar stat spread that Field has. He has the dodge ability as well, kind of similar to Karma. But his last ability, again, is also very similar to Karma, where when he's below 50% health, he gets 25% extra attack. Now, the attack boost is a lot less, but his HP is a little bit more reasonable. At 51,000, it's still pretty low, but the saving grace is that he is actually going to be able to attack faster than the person he's trying to stun, because he has 814 speed, and mages generally are some of the slower units in the game, so being able to stun mages at 80% of the time, and also getting to attack first, will mean that on the second round, he will have a good chance to hit a mage before they use their ability and have them locked in that position where they won't get to use their ability until like round 4. And that's very valuable. So that's why I was able to put him above Field. And I think that depending on what your opponent's team is, he might actually be very strong. He might not just be the 4th best. You might be able to consider him like 3rd or 2nd, depending on what your enemy team's composition is. If they have 2 or more mages, Lutz will just tear them apart. Being stunned for so long and at such a high rate is almost impossible to overcome. So I think he's a really good counter pick, and the way I've always looked at him is that I wouldn't put him on your main team, but like once you finish a good 6 hero roster where you have 6 heroes that are 9-star that you're happy with, Lutz is one of the heroes that you can start working on as a kind of countermeasure to fight people in the arena and stuff like that, or Guild Wars if you can predict what their heroes are going to be. So I had to give him a solid 4. Number 3 is going to be Aiden, and this is where I start to feel like things get a little bit predictable, because there's not much deviance in most people's opinions here, because we've had a lot of testing. People have tested heroes like Aiden a lot. We all know what he does. He has respectable HP, he has high attack, his speed is kind of low, but his damage is just insane. He only has 84% a chance or attack damage on a 9600 attack, which by itself doesn't seem great. But as we all know, whenever he gets this vulnerable ability, or whenever this vulnerability procs, which happens every time an ally hero dies, he gains 20% armor break and 15% attack. Which means if he manages to attack on the second turn after your opponents have, but say 2 or 3 of your units have died before he attacks, all of a sudden he's going to do thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of damage. It's so much damage this guy can do. He can one-shot teams if he gets to the right setup. His third passive is increases armor break, so he passively has a nice bit of armor break anyway. And once you stack on 20%, you get 2 or 3 allies dead with this for this passive, which puts you at like 60 armor break, and the 32 that he starts off with passively, he's almost completely ignoring armor. And I guess this is a good segue into why I don't feel that armor is as good of a mitigator of damage as HP generally is, because people question, like, they say armor is a valuable stat. It does mitigate damage well, but the problem is that there are so many heroes that have access to armor break, and armor break is always issued in percent. And that means that even someone like Dentalion, who might have 1600 armor, it's not really that valuable if someone like Aiden can come in and shave even just the base 32% of it off, right off the top, and then you have another 20, another 20, another 20, depending on heroes die. It's armor is much more easily worked around than HP is. So I don't feel like armor is a great stat for reasons like that. Aiden's last ability is, once he dies, he explodes and just does 40% damage to all enemies. And I've always loved this little icon that they use to visualize the ability, because it literally looks like it doesn't even look like he's happy. He just has this curse that when you kill him, he just explodes, and he knows what's going to happen, but it's unavoidable. I've always just found it a little bit of a comical picture that perfectly encapsulates everything that actually happens. And it's not that useful because, of course, when you don't want units to die to activate their abilities. But as we're starting to see with heroes like Margaret, it's starting to become a little bit more worthwhile depending on how strong it is. Now, I think they did nerf this. If I'm not mistaken, maybe 2 months ago, it was like 65%. And they nerfed it a bit because it was a bit too strong. Aiden was very powerful for one of the easier shadow heroes to get, so they had to kind of bring him in line with everybody else. And that's unfortunate, but I guess it makes sense because they have to... there was a lot of shadow heroes that were very powerful, and there were a lot of mages that were very powerful at that time. So I guess they were just trying to rein in the meta a bit. I don't know if they did it effectively, but that's neither here nor there. Second place is going to be Walter, and again, this is pretty stagnant, and it also means you probably know who number 1 is. It's pretty without contention. The biggest thing I want to bring up with Walter here is that I think it was like a month or 2 ago, probably around the same time the Aiden nerfs actually came through, they actually buffed Walter for PvP. They nerfed his damage in PvE by cutting the amount of time that an enemy can be poisoned, so it's 6 rounds you can be poisoned for, and I think that applies to the Envenom Blade is also only 6 rounds that they can be poisoned for, and the same thing with the Toximist Barrier, and that actually impacted his ability to hit Marauders a little bit. But they actually, in order to compensate for that, they gave him more base attack and I think a little bit more HP. Because I think he was at 48,000 HP before and only like 9,200 attack. So they gave him close to a 10% attack bonus and close to a 10% HP bonus, which in PvP terms is much more important than the continued poison after 6 rounds, in my opinion. I don't think it was enough to make him go crazy, but he's still an insanely powerful hero. And one of the things that's often underrated is that he has the ability to stun. Now, he only hits 2 units, so 45% chance on 2 units is not the greatest. But because he does such high damage, if he does happen to stun 2 units in combat, that is going to be so brutal to your enemies. That is the only way I find that he can beat the pick I made for first place, is that if Walter can actually be more effective than the first place hero if those 2 stuns land. Now, however, that's pretty unlikely. Anyone who's good at math can calculate that pretty quickly and show that the odds are not in his favor. But when that does happen, your team becomes so much stronger just based on a little bit of a roll of the dice. Everything he does is based off of poison. His passive, though, again, is another one of those armor break passives, which seems to be a very big theme in the Shadow faction, because I'm pretty sure that's their Shadow faction aura, is also armor break. They just do not ignore. They don't care about tank's armor. They just go right through it. It's just butter. Plus, they get 30% attack, which is insane. All of his attacks have a 100% chance to poison. That's what I like about this stuff. Is like there's a 100% chance to poison. This stuff does not mess around. He will poison you on every instance that you give him a chance. And his last ability is another one of those when below 50%, which again, another theme of the Shadow factions, is he will poison 2 background enemies, or 2 backline enemies, sorry, for 80% damage for 6 rounds. And that's just strange, because I feel like assassins like this that rely on bleed are just, it's so weird, because you always think of assassins as someone who can dispatch a hero or 2 quickly without wasting any time. But poison is just, it doesn't really fit that theme. Like, I get that it fits the real life themes of assassins, but an in-game kind of I guess culture for assassins is generally a quick kill, and poison generally is not that way. So it's just funny that they took him in such a strong angle like that. And number 1 is Bloodblade, and it was pretty much everyone knew this was coming. Bloodblade has been overpowered since he was released. He hasn't been touched since he was released, and he's been in a broken state for a long time, and it's hard to say if he's going to end that broken state ever. Maybe once they get another assassin, when they release the next Shadow Assassin, they might nerf Bloodblade to kind of push the new one ahead. But for now, he's clearly the best. His speed is actually really high at 820, is really nice. His ability is actually kind of weak up front, because it's 95 times 128 times 3, which is, it's not bad, but considering we've seen heroes stronger than this. But he also does 40%. Excuse me, he also does 48% extra damage against rangers, and what does this see? Yeah, and it also bleeds over turn. Like, that's another. He's another one of those heroes that's it's an assassin, but it's bleed over time. So it's kind of strange that like so many assassins work that way. His second passive, each attack has a 100% chance to bleed the target. Again, 100%. That's what I like to see. If you're gonna make these poison abilities, make them 100%. Don't screw around with luck, because it makes heroes feel like sometimes they do amazing and then other times they just fall off for no particular reason. But it does it's a 100% chance to deal 35% attack damage for 4 rounds. But he also gains 14% armor break. Now again, another one with just the armor break. They just cannot let that go. The third ability increases his hit by 25%, so again, another one that counters Mickey. That's going to be like a running joke from now on in my videos, is that everybody counters Mickey. And his attack is 25, armor break plus 28, and dealing 50% extra damage on bleeding foes. So one question that I've always wondered, I'm not sure if they actually do work this way, and I think I've been asked this before, but I didn't have a proper answer, is does his bleed work with Mirage? Now, it's not too important, because everything this guy does bleeds opponents, and it's a 100% chance to happen, so there's not really much need for an additional like supplement hero to try to make him stronger, because he's doing it anyway. But I've always just been curious to that. And his fourth ability is kind of what makes him ridiculous, actually. When I first seen this, I didn't think it was going to be too important, because it's hard to realize how effective ability like this can be. But 120% attack as HP is essentially, whenever he kills someone, he gains 20% or more, depending on your gear and your gems and your artifacts. He gains at least 20% of his health back whenever someone dies. So he has an insane amount of survivability. And not only is that good in PvP, but obviously that makes him good for things like the Brave Trial, where you can use him as a tank, because the first few stages, he's not going to take any damage. He's just going to, as the enemies die, you kill 6 enemies, he's going to gain all of his HP back almost every time for like at least the first 4 or 5 stages. And that is insane healing. Same thing with the Aspen dungeon. He can just go through the first few stages like no problem. He's just going to kill them one shot, and even if they hit him once or twice beforehand, he's always just going to heal it up. So he is amazing for those early stages in Brave Trial, in the Aspen dungeon, and of course it's well known that he's the highest DPS for Marauders as well. So Bloodblade is definitely the best assassin, and he's actually made his way into one of my least favorite characters because he does everything. That's the big problem. When you have a hero that just does everything, he's good at PvE, he's good at PvP, he's got sustain, he's got damage over time, he's got good burst damage. The only thing that this guy doesn't have is a stun. If he had crowd control, this would be like the perfect hero. There'd be nothing wrong with him. But I think they just went a little bit too far when it came to Bloodblade, and I do hope they rein him down, or at least rein everybody else up, so that he can be more like comparable to them. Because I think that's one big issue with a lot of game devs and the way they balance, is that they tend to nerf the biggest things, but I think it's better to buff the lesser things, because it makes everything feel stronger that way, and when everyone feels stronger, that's better than the top feeling weaker, in my opinion. But anyhow, this has been the Shadow tier list. Sorry that was probably kind of predictable, but the last two I think were the better ones. I think that Forest and Abyss are much more interesting than Shadow is, but it had to be done in the form of the series. So I appreciate anyone who did enjoy it, and if you did, please like the video and subscribe if you'd like to see more. And leave a comment if you disagree. If you think Karma is better than Field, for example, and you have a means to debate, then have at it. But anyway, thank you guys for watching, and have a great day.